And this is Ken Kraetzer visiting a friend from Pelham, TJ Clemente, who is a writer in Eastern Long Island now. Used to live in New York City. He's got a couple of novels out. TJ, great to see you.
Great to see you again, Kenny. It's been a while since those baseball days.
That's right, Pelham High School, and you were quite an athlete in several sports. Just tell us a little bit about your Pelham High School days. You have a lot of friends from the teams that you played on.
Well, that's true. I played on five different sports at Pelham High School, and we're all teammates. And through Facebook, like I hooked up with you, we're all back together and finding out how our lives went, and it's pretty amazing. A lot of amazing stories.
That's great, and I know you're into sailing and some of the outdoor sports here that are fabulous in the Hamptons area. Just tell us a little bit about your career. I mean, you were in New York City for a long time.
I worked for a family business most of my life. Then I worked for Northwestern Mutual, and then after 9/11, I was really unhappy with the way the city changed with all the security and so forth. So I went out to the Hamptons for a weekend, ended up buying a sailboat and never going back to New York. Somewhere in an office around Union Square is my stuff still uncleared out.
And you've worked for a media company here as a writer covering local events. So many of the distinguished visitors to the area. Tell us a little bit about how you got into writing.
Well, actually, I took someone sailing, and the summer ended, and I needed to do something. And one of the openings was at Dan's Papers, which back then was more of a family-oriented type of paper, the Finkelstein family. And I started off there, and I started with one story, then two, and then four, and then six, and then eight, and sometimes 11. And my formula was I took all the assignments no one else wanted. And then eventually, you're writing a lot of stuff. I may not have been the best writer, but I was the most prolific writer.
Well, along the way, you've got into writing novels, and your first novel, very successful, kind of about a little bit autobiographical, possibly, about moving from the bachelor life in New York City to life here in Eastern Long Island. Tell us a little bit about it.
Well, I like to think of it as fictional, based on some things that I could write from firsthand experience. But quite frankly, it is fictional. There are some things that people chuckle about because all writers, including Hemingway, who's probably rolling over in his grave with me mentioning him, use parts of their own experience in their novels. But basically, it was a story of someone who went to the city and things didn't work out just right, and he ended up on the East End, and everything out here is so beautiful that good things happened.
Well, that's great. And then, you have a second novel that you just finished, which Triangle Love, which starts with a couple of characters who meet at your alma mater, George Washington University in D.C., and then carry on to start a business in New York. And I just tell us a little bit about it.
Well, the interesting thing about the Triangle Love was the whole idea of the whole story of it came to me when I was walking down Mount Blanc in the Alps after I'd climbed it. It's like it just came to me, you're exhausted, you're tired, but when I got down to the bottom, the whole story was in my head. This is about 1995, and I wrote down notes on yellow manila paper, whatever they call it, and I tucked them away. And then, unfortunately, I got divorced around 2000. A few of the things I got back were those notes. So I took those notes and I laughed. And then around 2003, I typed out the notes. And last February, I turned it into a book.
Well, when I was reading it, it immediately reminded me of one of my favorite authors from Britain, Jeffrey Archer, who writes books following the lives of characters, often over multiple novels, and especially his book Cain and Abel, which has always been one of my favorites. So you have a lot of twists in the stories of these three characters as their lives develop.
And the interesting thing is that, remember I said I wrote half the book. When I finished the book, the twists twisted in different directions than even I had written down in the outline. And the amazing thing is that I'm probably going to write a sequel to Triangle Love because so many people want to know what happens after it ended. And because it has a surprise ending. And so that's probably my next project, and it will be called Other Men's Wives.
Wow, and I know a lot of it's set in Westchester County, so a lot of familiar landmarks to those of us that are natives of Pelham and the area. And uh, one of the questions we've been kind of talking about is how are people reading today? I mean, we've got hardcover books. I was talking to a marketer the other day who said everything should be online. What is your preference between reading a novel, perhaps online on something like a tablet, versus having a nice hardcover book in front of you?
Now, this is a really amazing question because it's like sociology all over the place. Number one, I'm old-fashioned. I like to read a newspaper and I like to read a book and hold the pages and know that I'm in the middle and the end. But if you look at the numbers of what's selling, it's the Kindles that are selling, and even audiobooks, which my wife is also an author. She has two wonderful books out there, Grant Me a Higher Love and Why Good People Don't Leave Bad Relationships. And that one's on audio, and it's selling amazingly on audiobook. But I haven't done audiobooks. But the point is, I think today's younger people are not reading books the way we did. I don't think they have the time. They have the devices, and I have a device myself, and we're always peeking at the device. When we used to sit in a chair and read for hours, now we'd peek at the device to see if we had an email, a message, a check up on Twitter. I mean, it's the way of the future.
Well, you're had quite a bit of experience in media the past decade, and in a couple of different formats, and it's changing fast. And I know the writing I do, I try to get it out in as many places as possible. Between Facebook and Twitter and even LinkedIn on occasion. What are your thoughts about how media is changing, either for the better or for the worse?
Well, first of all, it's unpredictable. I mean, as we're talking right now, I have three pieces on the internet from two different sources that are out that are no more than 5 days old. The first one I sort of put out, and it's as you know, it's gotten 335 shares, which is a lot of shares for an article on an internet site. And then the other one is in Hamptons.com, which is about the series The Affair, which takes place in Montauk, which, since I lived in Montauk, it's kind of close to my heart. And that one, the point I'm making is you never know which piece is going to fly and which one's just going to sit there and not be read. And you can't predict it. I mean, I was once surprised. I had one that went like 1,400 shares. Just went all over the place. It was being shared, it was in Oregon website. As you know also, when you write something interesting, it gets picked up by websites you'd never heard of, and then it has a life of its own. Unfortunately, we don't get paid for that. And that's the second part of your question. There's been a downward trending reality in what writers get paid because of the internet and because of advertising sales in what do they call it? Printed journalism. After the bubble burst with real estate. When the real estate was hot out here, I was getting paid very good money for articles. And then when it went the other way in 2007, 2008, the fees just kept going lower and lower. And it's not just me, it's New York Times, the Washington Post, the magazines. If you look around, a lot of famous magazine writers that you see on the talking heads, all of a sudden you see them just representing their own blogs and stuff. You don't see them working for Time, Newsweek, or whatever anymore,
Well, it's different. What do you see the way for a writer to be successful and in some way make a living from it?
Innovation, and you have to be in the moment. You have to be in the moment. You have to feel. It's interesting. The stories that I have sometimes written stories that when they went out, they became relevant. Not when I was writing them. You have to be in front of the wave somehow. And the other thing is, if you don't ride the wave of change, you'll get crushed by it. So you have to change with your markets. You have to do your research, and you have to be accurate. You have to be truthful. And I guess that's it. And the other thing is, you have to work hard, and you have to push. I don't want to use the word push. You have to link your stuff all over the place and get it out there, and then stuff happens. And you can't predict it. It's so funny. And then my wife, for example, wrote an article, and then all of a sudden she gets a phone call from someone in Hollywood who wants her to fly out there. And it's just amazing how it's changed from the old days. That's all I have to say. How about yourself? What's your secret?
Well, what we find now is getting the material out in as many directions as possible. With sometimes working with major websites, sometimes on our own Facebook pages, and sometimes getting out on Twitter and also on LinkedIn when we do business interviews. But the funniest thing is when I get the chance to interview some of the West Point football players, and every once in a while, one of them, it obviously gets into their family network because all of a sudden you get 600 views on it, instead of 100. And you can tell that the families and the high schools back home are enjoying that, which also West Point appreciates because it's good, when they can show that their freshmen and their young cadets are doing well and happy. It helps with the parents in the next group that may want to come to the academy. So TJ, we're going to be looking forward to your next book, but how can people obtain copies of your first two novels?
Well, they're available on Amazon.com. TJ Clemente, Triangle Love, and Whistling Past the Hottie Graveyard. This one is basically a book about someone slugging it out in Manhattan on the Upper East Side. And this book is basically about kids who meet in college and then they go through over a 40-year period, move to Westchester, have a successful computer-oriented type of financing business, and then interesting things happen. And so you would get it on Amazon.com. I just wanted to mention before we finish this up is that through your Facebook posting, I've been able to follow West Point sports, and I've really gotten a kick out of it because I went up there so many times with the Pelham Boy Scouts. We used to have the West Point campery, and I played hockey against the cadets, and it's just such a phenomenal facility. I don't know if anyone's you can go up there for tours. There's nothing like the training field to walk around with those amazing statues of Eisenhower and MacArthur, I believe, that tower over the field, and then the cannons and the displays and the buildings, and then it's just an amazing day to get up there over the Hudson River and look at Storm King Mountain and across at Spring, whatever it is, Cold Springs Harbor, whatever it is. It's just and for you to have that as a job. I'm sitting there, watching these football games and all the pageantry and it's just amazing. Did you go to the Army-Navy game this year?
I was there on the sideline. We did about 10 videos. Just go to West Point Football Report, and yeah, it was the most amazing thing this year at the game. Army played a terrific game against a very, very good Navy team. Navy blew out a very good Pittsburgh team, and Army was a 3-touchdown underdog going in. And they were leading at the half, and they threw a ball towards the end zone. If they caught it, they were going to win the game.
It was like less than a touchdown, right?
Yeah, it was a 4-point win by Navy, and
Navy's nationally ranked, and Army doesn't even have a winning record, right?
Right. Well, it's the rivalry between Army and Navy is so special. At West Point, at the end of every meeting, they say beat Navy. It's amazing.
It's kind of I remember the days when I'm not old when John F. Kennedy would go to the games when they were played in Philadelphia, Soldier Field or whatever it was called down there, and he would sit on one side for one half and then the other side for the other half because as commander-in-chief, even though he was in the Navy, he had to pretend he was rooting for both sides.
Well, that's true. I mean the story of the '63 game and the he had been at the game the year before and he was a Navy fan. There's no question about it. But the game after he died was postponed a week, and it was all about him that year in '63, and it was a phenomenal game. But it was played without all the pomp and circumstance. But he's a revered part of the Army-Navy rivalry, John F. Kennedy, and all the players from that era will say that. But I was saying at the end of the game this year, they sing the alma maters of each school, and the team that wins the game sings second, which is a great honor. So Army lines up to in front of the Corps cadets, 4,000 classmates in the stands, and they got a standing ovation from their classmates in the Corps cadets, which I'd never seen before. And somebody yells out at them, "You guys played a wonderful game." And And that was neat because they really played to their full potential, and they're a building program under Jeff Monk, and so I do have a great opportunity to interview the cadets and tell their story, which we always enjoy doing.